But surely those people, as you were arrested, there were people working for Goldman Sachs looking down from the windows.
They were taking pictures of us.
Taking pictures, laughing. Surely you don't think they would wish that outcome in Africa or anywhere else, right?
Well, it's moral fragmentation. I mean, they blind themselves to what they do all day long, and they define themselves as good human beings by other criteria because they're a good father or a good husband or because they go to church. But it is that human trait to engage in what I would have to describe as a system of evil, and yet look at it as just a job.
But aren't we all then, therefore, and I come back to this, aren't we all part of this system that in some way produces Pine Ridge, Immokalee, the coal fields, the inner cities, and the starving children in Africa? Aren't we all who have jobs and participate in the culture and are in the economic game? Aren't we all, in a way, as complicit as those people looking down on you from those windows at Goldman Sachs?
No, because the people who actually run the commodities index are a very tiny, elite, and extremely wealthy group, and they're highly compensated. These people make hundreds of thousands, often millions of dollars a year, and most of us don't make that. And that personal enrichment, I think, is a powerful inducement to ignore their complicity in what is clearly a crime against other human beings.
But do you think what you did made any difference? Goldman Sachs hasn't changed.
Well, that doesn't matter. I did what I had to do. I did what I believed I should have done. And faith is a belief that it does make a difference, even if all of the empirical signs around you point otherwise. I think that fundamentally is what faith is about, and I'm not a very good Christian anymore, but I retain enough of my Christian heritage and my seminary training to still believe that.
What are you?
A sinner.
Welcome to the clan.
A doubter.
But you're driven by something. I mean, I talked to you when you wrote your first and remarkable book, War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning. I haven't seen anyone as affected in their life after their experience as a journalist as you have been. I mean, there have been others, I just don't know them, but somehow what you're doing today goes back to what you saw and did and felt and experienced in all those years you were overseas and on the frontiers of trouble.
Well, because when you spend that long on the outer reaches of empire, you understand the cruelty of empire, what Conrad calls the horror, and the lies that we tell ourselves about what is done in our name. Whether that's in Gaza, whether that's in Iraq, whether that's in Afghanistan, Yemen, Somalia, El Salvador, I mean, there's a long list. And when you come back from the outer reaches of empire, you are, and I think, many combat veterans feel this who come back, you're forever alienated. And you seek to speak a very unpleasant truth about who we are, a truth that most people don't want to hear. And yet, I think to hold that truth in and to remain silent and not to speak that truth destroys you. That it's better to get up and speak it, even as you correctly point out, that Goldman Sachs gets up, everyone at Goldman Sachs gets up the next morning and does it. I mean, this was also true as a war correspondent. I mean, the Serbs would kill. They'd block all the roads into the village. We'd walk in with our satellite phones, we'd file it. We never believed they weren't going to do it again the next day. But somehow not to chronicle it, not to take the risks to report it, was to be complicit in that killing. And I think the same kind of thought goes into what's happening here.
But do you think taking sides marginalizes your journalism? I mean, when you were being arrested, some businessman was quoted in the paper passing by and looking at those of you being carried away and said, bunch of idiots. He needs to hear what you or read what you say. Do you think he will once he knows you've taken sides?
Well, I think that in life we always have to take sides.
But I'm talking about journalists. Do journalists always have to take
Yes, and
sides?
journalists always do take sides. You know, you've been a journalist a long time. The idea that there's something objective and impartial is just a lie. We sell it, but I can take the same set of facts. I was a newspaper reporter for a long time, and I can spin that story one way or another. We manipulate facts. That's what we do. And I think that the really great journalists.
Not necessarily to deceive, though. Some do, I know. But
Right, but we do.
We choose the facts we want to organize.
Of course, it's selective, and it's what facts we choose, how we place it, where we put the quotes, and I think the really great journalists, like the great preachers, care fundamentally about truth, and truth and news are not the same thing. And the really great reporters, and I've seen them, you know, in all sorts of news organizations, are management headaches because they care about truth at the expense of their own career.
What do you mean truth as opposed to news?
Well, let's take the Israeli occupation of Gaza. You know, if I had a dinner with any Middle East correspondent who covered Gaza, none of us would have any disagreements about the Israeli behavior in Gaza, which is a collective war crime. And yet to get up and write it and say it within American society is not a career enhancer. Because there's a powerful Israeli lobby, and it's a lobby that I don't think represents Israel. It represents the right wing of Israel, and you know it. But the great reporters don't care, and they're there. But you know, large institutions like the New York Times attract huge numbers of careerists, like any other large institutions, the church, of course, being no exception. And those are the people who are willing to take moral shortcuts to promote themselves within that institution. And when somebody becomes a headache, even if they may agree with them, even if they may know that they are speaking a truth, and it puts their career in jeopardy, they will push them out or silence them. So I think that one can take sides, and Orwell becomes the kind of model for this. But one can never not tell the truth. And I've often written stories that are not particularly flattering, and there's much in this book about people in Pine Ridge or Camden, you know, or that is not flattering. I mean, we're interviewing people that are drug addicts and this kind of stuff, and
Drug
prostitutes
dealers.
and
Yeah, drug dealers,
yeah.
prostitutes.
So we're you know, the lie of omission is still a lie. But I don't think any foreign correspondent who covers war, whether it was in Bosnia or whether it was in Sarajevo, can be indifferent to the tremendous human suffering before them and not want that human suffering to stop.
But there is a price, as you have said, to be paid for stepping outside of the system that enabled your name and reputation and becoming a critic of that system. I mean, what price do you think you've paid?
I don't think I paid a price. I think I would have paid a price for staying in. I wouldn't have been able to live with myself. You know, I was pushed out of the New York Times because I was publicly denouncing the invasion of Iraq. And again, it comes down to that necessity to speak a truth, or at least the truth as far as you can discern it. I spent months of my life in Iraq. I know the instrument of war. I understood on many ways, in all the ways that this was going to be a disaster, including upsetting the power balance in the Middle East. It's one of the great strategic blunders of the United States. It's empowered Iran. And to remain silent would have been the price. Was it good for my career? Well, of course not, but my career was never the point. I didn't drive down Mount Igman into Sarajevo when it was being hit with 2,000 shells a day because it was good for my career. I went there because what was happening was a crime against humanity. And as a reporter, I wanted to be there to chronicle it.
So you don't think journalism is futile?
I think journalism is essential. I think it's essential, and we're watching its destruction. You know, journalism, the power of journalism is that it is rooted in verifiable fact. You go out as a reporter, you seek to find out what is factually correct. You cross-check it with other sources. It's sent to an editor, it's fact-checked, you put it out. That's all vanishing. That's what we're really losing with journalism. Yes, you know, commercial journalism, there were things they wouldn't write about. You know, as Schanberg says, the power of great newspapers like the Times is that at least it stopped things from getting worse. I think that's right.
But can it make things better? I mean, do you think you can accomplish more as a dissenter? And I look upon you now, when I ask you what's your faith, I think your faith is in dissent, if I may say so. It's in this far and no further. But do you think you can accomplish more as a dissenter than as a journalist?
Yeah, it's not a question that I've asked. Because the question is, what do you have to do? I certainly knew after 15 years at the New York Times that running around on national television shows denouncing the war in Iraq was, as a news reporter, was tantamount to career suicide. I mean, I was aware of that. And yet, as Paul Tillich writes about, institutions are always inherently demonic, including the church. And that you cannot finally serve the interests of those institutions. That for those who seek the moral life, there will always come a time in which they have to defy even institutions they care about if they are able to retain that moral core. And in essence, what the New York Times or other institutions were asking is that I muzzle myself.
But all institutions do that, don't they?
All institutions do.
Intuitively or explicitly?
That's right. And I think for those of us who care about speaking, the truth, or if you want to call it dissent, we are going to have to accept that is at one day there's going to probably mean a clash with the very institutions that have nurtured and supported us. And I have been nurtured and supported by these institutions.
Your columns,